Let's look at the next unit, subunit within Weber, Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Now, Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism is, of course, a very important reference. Let's look at some of the questions that have been asked. Distinguish between fact and value in Weber's Protestant ethic. So, fact and value. Examine Max Weber's method of maintaining objectivity in social research. Well, this is in from fact, value, and objectivity, but just in case you want to kind of consider this in the context of how Weber carries out his work on Protestant ethic and maintains objectivity. Role of Calvinist ethic. Explain how Weber's characterization of capitalism is different from that of Marx. So these are some of the important pointers. Now, Weber wrote Protestant Ethic and Spirit of Capitalism between 1903 and 1904, and these were published as separate essays in 1905 and 1906. The interesting thing about this, and I think this has to be in the introduction itself, the most striking thing about this particular work of Weber is that it draws connections between religion and economy. So here we are looking at religion and, now remember, religion and economy are very different in terms of their orientations. Religion for the most part is otherworldly, economy is this worldly. So what is Weber doing? Weber is kind of bringing together two completely different structures, religion and economy. Now these references are considered poles apart in our day-to-day life. So the common sense will never have any association between religion and economy, but it is to the genius of Weber that he brings together these two and draws extraordinary connections in his study of spread of rational capitalism in Western Europe. So this is something, and when he's talking about the Protestant ethic, remember, he's particularly talking about Calvinism, because he's not talking about Protestantism as such, but this is the Calvinist ethic, right? He is not talking about Protestantism at large. So and the other thing that is also important is this is not a study that brings in causality. I have talked about this a while ago. I referred to this some time back. It is not about causality. Weber is not at all directly linking the idea system of Protestant ethic to the structures of the capitalist system. There is no direct causal connection. He is linking the Protestant ethic to the spirit of capitalism. So in other words, one could say this is about linkages between two systems of ideas, and he's working with what we call sociological probability and not necessarily historical causality. So to set the record straight, to kind of put matters the right way on record, the Protestant ethic, this particular work, does not deal with the rise of modern capitalism, but is about the origin of a peculiar spirit, right? The origin of a peculiar spirit. It's about the origin of a peculiar spirit that eventually led to the expansion of modern rational capitalism. Just one or two pointers. Think of the word ethic, for example. Right? So why is it just a passing? So basically, the usage of the word ethic is beyond the domain of religion. Whenever you use the word ethic, you are not necessarily talking about conventional religion or religious stuff. Weber uses the word ethic to suggest the this worldliness of Protestantism. So he does not want us to look at Protestantism as a strictly religious code. He uses the word ethic so as to bring in the this worldly aspect of Protestantism, specifically Calvinism. So that is something that we need to be aware of. And the spirit is also something that he refers to in the context of this essence of modern capitalism, the thirst for money making, etc. So the spirit of capitalism is about three overriding demands or three overriding imperatives. One is the devotion to amassing wealth and profit beyond the personal needs. That is something that capitalism swears by. You have to go beyond your personal needs and wants, right? So this absolute mad zeal, devotion to amass wealth and wealth and profit beyond personal needs. Then the commitment to unrelieved toil. You need to work and work as hard as you can. So you work too much, and then there is also self-denial, meaning you do not really spend too much upon yourself. The insistence is more on work, toils, relentless, unrelieved toil. And the third one is the use of personal restraint in the world and the avoidance of the use of wealth for purposes of private enjoyment. So the wealth is not to be used for private enjoyment. The wealth is earned only to earn more wealth, right? So money is earned to earn more money. That is the ultimate thing. So this is the ethical spirit of capitalism, not to kind of indulge in excesses, not to spend on oneself, but wealth making or money making for the sake of money making, as of now. So basically, compared to modern capitalism, in the traditional versions of capitalism, this was not really the case. Basically, Weber was very clear that workers would prefer less work to more pay, relaxation to exertion, and the worker-employer relationship was informal. It was more direct and it was personal. But in advanced capitalism, in modern capitalism, things change completely. So the spirit of capitalism is not simply defined by economic greed. It is in many ways the exact opposite. It is basically a moral and ethical system. So the spirit of there's something very moral about the spirit of capitalist system. So it's an ethos that essentially stresses economic success, but at the same time also a certain kind of self-restraint. So that's the spirit of capitalism that Weber is referring to. And of course, then he talks about a range of other things, but we won't go into that. Benjamin Franklin and others, and how that would lead to a certain kind of an understanding of what it means to be successful and what it means to be wealthy and rich and so on. Then the Calvinism doctrines, God's will as unknowable, the doctrine of predestination, this worldly asceticism, etc. So these are some of the things that help us. And then the idea of calling. So Weber talks about these in order to underline this very, very important Calvinist ethics. So basically what is also important, and this is where Merton can also be brought in, when Weber is writing about this connection between Calvinist ethics and Calvinist ethics and a certain kind of expansion of modern rational capitalism, Weber is very clear that Calvinists did not consciously seek to create a capitalist system. It's not like Calvinists just got together under one roof and they decided one fine day that we Calvinists are going to contribute to the spread and rise of modern capitalism. No, Weber is absolutely clear that's not the case. The Calvinists simply went ahead with their certain way of life, and as a result of that, you have this spread of advanced rational capitalism. So Weber says capitalism can very well be considered as, or here we are borrowing from Merton, capitalism as an unanticipated consequence of the Protestant ethic. So use this when we are discussing Merton in relation to unanticipated consequences, because Merton is very clear that consequences need not be always anticipated or intended. They could very well be unanticipated. They could very well be unintended. So there is this idea of spirit, and there is this idea of a certain association with the ethics. Now, then Weber also brings in spirit and substance, and you know very well that when he talks about religions of China, religions of India, and in both the cases he says that the substance was there, but the spirit was missing. And then he talks about ancient Judaism, and in the case of Judaism he says that, well, the spirit is there, but the substance is missing. So he has this, so the spirit is basically the ethic, and the substance is to do with techniques of accounting, factory system, availability of labor, etc., etc. So in few religions you have spirit, you don't have substance, and then you have other religions where you have substance but you do not have the spirit. So he ends up comparing various religions of the world, particularly Confucianism in China, Buddhism and Hinduism in India, and then ancient Judaism. So these are some of the pointers that you can always keep in mind. If you're looking at some of the, now just to quickly look at how the fact and value thing, just very briefly, see, the point is, if you look at Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, the spirit of capitalism is something, the spirit in itself, the fact of, shall we say, the fact of the expansion of capitalism, the spread of rational advanced capitalism, and how Calvinist values, right? We are looking at Calvinist values within Protestantism, how a certain way of living life actually contributes to the spread or the rise, not necessarily the rise, but the spread and growth of modern rational capitalism. So one set of things, the fact of the spread and the reality of the values of Calvinism, how they come together and contribute to something that Weber is very much invested in. Then this objectivity thing, of course, is not needed. And then so Weber's characterization of capitalism. Now, unlike Marx, who looks at capitalism as a mode of production, looks at capitalism as an important chapter in his broader grand theory of historical materialism, Weber is very clear that capitalism actually is to be understood as an unintended consequence or an unanticipated consequence of Calvinist ethics. So he is talking about the role of religion, and his theory of religion then is one of social change. Religion, how religion brings about change. That's the Weberian theory of change. So the functionalist theory is about order. The Marxist theory is about a certain kind of false consciousness. But Weber is absolutely clear that religion brings about change. And here what is happening is that religion is determining the economic. So this is what we call the social consequences of development, right? There is a way in which, or the social determinants, if you have this particular thing in place, it will lead to this. So that's something that we can always keep in mind. So when he talks about capitalism, when Weber talks about capitalism, in terms of origins, in terms of its growth, in terms of its overall composition, and then in terms of its future, Weber is absolutely different from the Marxian position. So Marx is very clear that capitalism actually sows its own seeds of destruction. Weber is not even remotely referring to that. Weber is damn clear that capitalism only acquires newer, more intelligent, more adaptive, gets into more adaptive forms. In terms of the class composition as well, Weber very categorically points out there are 4 classes, whereas Marx is of the opinion that it is bipolar. Weber does not really pay attention that much to ownership of means of production. He looks at class in terms of market situation. Weber is also clear that capitalism did not arise as a result of some sort of a shift in terms of mode of production. He is more interested in the role played by Protestantism, specifically Calvinist ethics, in terms of spread and advancement of modern rational capitalism. So these are some of the pointers. If you want to look at the criticisms, there are a lot of criticisms. Scholars have pointed out it's a selective study of specific aspects. For example, particularly in relation to Buddhism and Hinduism, Weber is horrendously selective. He does not really present the whole picture. He's not very judicious in his take on Hinduism and Buddhism. For example, karma, the theory of karma and the theory of dharma need not always lead to a certain kind of a defeatist and fatalist attitude. It can lead to action as well. So karma, the theory of karma has both sides to it. But Weber only looks at the fatalism and the defeatism associated with it. Then this idea of the Bhagavad Gita's idea, doing one's duty without thinking of benefit, is kind of associated with the doctrine of calling that Weber uses in relation to the Calvinist ethics, the calling, the idea of calling. Weber goes ahead with very, very narrow interpretation of various religious tenets so as to fit them into his frame of analysis. And Weber's selective approach, given the selective approach that Weber has, one can always point out that Weber is essentially working with ideal types that are absolutely erroneous These are erroneous ideal types. Then there are studies by people like Milton Singer that refute the Weberian claim. So Weber's argument is that the caste system hindered the progress of rational capitalism. But Milton Singer, on the basis of solid, stellar fieldwork, Milton Singer draws our attention to the leading industrialists of Madras in this work, Beyond Tradition and Modernity in Madras. And he argues that caste and tradition fit very well for the industrial development in India. Caste-based division of labor has been used successfully in the specialization of industrial workers. And Milton Singer also tells us that through the process of what he calls compartmentalization, that while these people are at work, they do not follow caste, but once they are back home, they follow caste. Compartmentalization. So many industrialists kept their business obligations and ritual obligations separate. So ritual obligation, one thing. Business obligation, another. Once you're home, you take care of ritual obligations. Once you are at the business front, you take care of the business obligations. So as a result, what happened was there was no conflict between an individual's role as a businessman and his role as a religious person or member of a particular caste on the other. So these are some of the pointers. Then there is also R.H. Tawney, Tawney, who kind of largely accepted Weber's thesis, but he expanded this particular Protestant ethic thesis in his work, Religion and the Rise of Capitalism, that came out in 1926, arguing that social and political pressures and the spirit of individualism were more significant factors. So Weber is only talking about Calvinism, but Tawney is saying that rise of individualism, social and political pressures, they play a more decisive role in the development of capitalism than this Calvinist theology. I think with this we come to an end. This was Weber, Max Weber, all in all, from start to finish, in the light of PYQs, in the light of important pointers, and also anticipated questions, anticipated themes that you might want to pay attention to more diligently. So this is the end of it. Thank you very much for your time and attention and patience. And I'll see you very soon with another video very soon on Talcott Parsons, the next thinker in the series. Thank you and all the very best.